of Minnesota, where it has been below zero the last few days. And if you're in a warmer climate, you are truly blessed. But I love living in Minnesota. It's where my family and grandchildren are, and not looking back. But you know, what I've developed with KeithRN, for those of you that aren't familiar with what I do, is that my passion is to really strengthen and transform how nursing is taught using the transformational paradigm shifts that Dr. Pat Benner introduced over 10 years ago that we're going to be talking about tonight, and with an emphasis to prepare students for practice in addition to licensure. And really what I want to encourage educators to realize is that when educators implement educational best practices, as advocated by Dr. Pat Benner and other practical best practice strategies, you will develop the clinical reasoning skills that lead to clinical judgment that will prepare your students for both practice and licensure, including the upcoming next generation. And you know, my other passion is to really shrink this practice gap, you know, between how nursing is taught and how it's practiced in the real world has been way too big for too long. And it's been documented in the literature for almost 50 years. And, you know, I have a vision to change that. And it's my passion to really encourage other educators to be a part of that dream, to strengthen and transform nursing education, shrink the gap. And using my lens of recent clinical practice, as well as a doctorate in nursing education, I really kind of have a bifocal lens that in essence sees both practice and academia. And so I'm excited to be here tonight. And I want to get a shout out for those of you that have joined us live. Let me know who you are, where you're from, and just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us tonight. And so I just want to basically highlight, you know, if you're checking this out, the Facebook live stream is really my opportunity to dialogue with nurse educators. I'm going to ask some questions. I want you to actively engage in the chat. You know, many of you don't like students who are just kind of like watching the live stream or watching your Zoom virtual class or clinical, but you don't know if they're out there. You don't know if they're engaging. So I want to give you permission, and I really want you to get those fingers on the typewriter, on your keyboard, I should say. Let me know you're there. And I'm going to ask a couple of very important reflection questions tonight. And so I really would love to hear your comments, and I'll call you out. I've got the chat right here on my right, and we'll be talking about this. And so I want you to know that every Facebook Live is about 30 to 45 minutes. It's recorded. And the link lives on my Facebook page, KeithRN, Think Like a Nurse. Simply search that in Facebook, and you'll see right underneath the banner of KeithRN is the videos. And every live stream we've done is archived there with the link. So if you found this content helpful or any other past content, you can access and copy that link, share it with your department, share it with those who are passionate to be part of this needed change as well. And you know, last week, we had Donna Iggy with me, and that was 2 weeks ago actually, but in their last Facebook Live, she talked about everything clinical judgment and next gen. So if you missed our conversation, please be sure to catch that. And again, it's on my Facebook page, KeithRN, Think Like a Nurse. If you simply like that page, you'll be in the loop with everything I'm doing, including future Facebooks. I also want to let you know I have another resource that serves the needs of nurse educators I'm really proud of, and that's the Facebook group. It's a closed educator group that I'm the admin for. It's called Teachers Transforming Nursing Education. And if you're not a part of that, please just simply search it, go in there. It's a closed group. I don't want students in there, so I ask some questions that need to be answered. Answer the questions, you're in, and you're inside a community of over 7,000 educators, nurse educators from around the world. You ask a question, you have a challenge, you have a splinter in your brain, post it. You will get immediate responses or very quickly from educators inside that group, and you'll get some innovative and help that we all need, because we need community, especially during this pandemic. We can't do change alone. We need each other. And so I just want you to know that that group is available. And please just, I would encourage you to access that and be a part of the needed change. And so as we talk tonight, we're going to be talking about 4 essential shifts or paradigm shifts that we need to be a part of to really implement needed transformation in nursing education. This book rocked my world by Dr. Pat Benner and her colleagues from the Carnegie Foundation's research back in 2010. And it's titled Educating Nurses, a Call for Radical Transformation. You know, Dr. Pat Benner was prophetic in her insights, recognizing that when she did her research over a decade ago, we really need to do some things differently to strengthen how nursing education is taught. And unfortunately, we're still struggling 10 years later. We're making progress, but we still have a long ways to go. And in fact, the fact that we have next generation NCLEX breathing down our necks in just a couple of years, raising the bar of developing clinical judgment, is a testimony to the fact that we still need to strengthen our craft. And, you know, every nurse educator, you know, needs to embrace, I think, the motto of Lowe's home improvement stores: never stop improving. You know, we may be good, and, you know, we're all good at what we do. I think we're all passionate about what we do, but we can always be better. You know, and that's my goal, is to empower those educators who really want to be better, embrace the needed change. But, you know, transformational change isn't just flipping classrooms. It's radically rethinking how we teach nursing. And we need to allow the title of this book to really sober us. It's a time for radical transformation. And, you know, I'm kind of a dreamer. I'm a visionary. I believe that nursing education can be changed. And as a new educator, I saw this gap as a nurse in practice who was teaching nursing, how it's taught and how it's practiced. And things like NANDA and 3-part precisely worded statements on your care plan, or you get docked points, and extensive care planning. You know, I'm not against care plans, but some of these principles that are not really relevant to the real world practice, we've got to let go of. So today, let's dig deep and let's go and let Benner's paradigm shifts inform and guide how we change and how we do things differently. Because I think that in nursing education, I've just noticed that there are things that we oftentimes, there's bandwagons we can oftentimes jump on, and we don't know the literature. We don't know if this is educational best practices. There's just a lot of things out there that we seem to just sometimes just gravitate towards. We don't really know why we're doing it. But Dr. Benner and the Carnegie Foundation gave us some clear guidance, kind of like Moses, to lead us out of the wilderness, really into the promised land of transformational change. So let's take a look at each of these transformational paradigm shifts one at a time. And if you don't have this book in your library, please go to Amazon, purchase it, buy 1 or 2 copies, be generous, and have that as part of your library in your department so you can get all faculty on the same page. Because really what I'm sharing tonight with these paradigm shifts, and then we're going to discuss the fears that keep us from moving forward, because that's the thing. We have a lot of knowledge. We've got all the tools. But some of us struggle, including myself, to step out and do what is needed to transform how we teach. And so let's get started and look at transformational paradigm shift number 1. Contextualize your content to the bedside of patient care. Now, what Dr. Benner is advocating is that we need to remember that textbook knowledge is simply that. It's decontextualized knowledge that doesn't really hook it to a real world scenario. So everything that you teach, whether it be fundamentals, peds, OB, mental health, whatever concept you're teaching, contextualize the content, contextualize the concept to a real world patient. So because nursing, as we know, is a practice-based profession. It's not what a nurse knows up here and can pass a test. It's what can they demonstrate as it relates to applying that knowledge to the bedside of patient care. So utilizing salient case studies, bringing simulation principles into your classroom, bringing a mannequin, doing some things, a video, bringing that context, whatever you can do, make it a priority that every content classroom lecture, you are contextualizing it in some way. And I've talked in the past about scrambled classrooms and kind of that flipping where you kind of do a 20-minute need-to-know lecture, then the rest of that 30 minutes in that hour block is active learning that brings context to your content. So that's number one. And so let's make that paradigm shift a part of our practice as nurse educators. Paradigm shift number two, integrate classroom and clinical learning. This is kind of a dovetail to paradigm shift number one that Dr. Benner advocated as she observed programs from around the country and saw the weaknesses and the strengths. Basically, again, it's bringing those clinical realities into your classroom where instead of just kind of, we have silos in nursing education traditionally. We have the classroom where we teach and we do our lecture and we do our other knowledge distribution. And then we have the clinical where we basically take care of patients. But these circles are not intersecting the way they need to. They're kind of still in their own separate world. We need to integrate them so they're coming together and therefore becoming, our classrooms becomes more like clinical. That's a principle that Dr. Benner made very clear from educating nurses. That's a transformational paradigm shift. The third paradigm shift is emphasizing clinical reasoning. And, we need to define our terms to really understand it. She said we need to kind of look at other ways of thinking. We've emphasized historically in the past, if you remember like 10 years ago, critical thinking. Well, now clinical reasoning needs to be emphasized. Now, this was 10 years ago, but now we're seeing how much are you hearing about clinical judgment? Clinical judgment, next-gen NCLEX. It's now all about clinical judgment. But what we need to remember from Dr. Benner's paradigm recommendation, that's really not a recommendation, it's really a requirement. We need to emphasize clinical reasoning. And clinical reasoning, simply defined by Dr. Benner, which I think has one of the best definitions for us as educators. Clinical reasoning is the ability of the nurse to think in action and reason as a situation changes. Critical thinking, in essence, many definitions, but Potter and Perry's Fundamentals of Nursing says it very concisely and beautifully. It's the ability of the nurse to understand and apply what they know from a situation or from the knowledge that is being taught. Do your students understand and then able to apply what they're being taught in your classroom, or are they simply memorizing it where it's quickly forgotten under the load of infobesity and TMI? So we need to recognize that, there's a simple equation to practice: critical thinking, understanding essential content that's taught in the classroom, plus clinical reasoning, thinking in action at the bedside of patient care equals the outcome of a correct clinical judgment. Clinical judgment is an outcome. You cannot teach it directly. That's Tanner's definition. That's also the NCSBN model. NCSBN's definition of clinical judgment includes that very clear statement. It is an outcome. It means that we can't teach clinical judgment directly. We need to teach our students to both critically think plus clinically reason to equal the outcome of a judgment. So clinical reasoning, really, if you want to be a purist, we need to really emphasize both critical thinking and the clinical reasoning using these principles of bringing context to our content in whatever that looks like, and some of those strategies that I've been advocating for years, and I'll be talking about those in the future. So that remains in vogue, remains essential. Now the fourth paradigm shift, and I need to apologize. I have not emphasized this paradigm shift as I've been speaking across the country for the last 10 years almost. It's been 9 years since I had my first conference invite at the National Elsevier's Faculty Development in 2012, which was unexpected. But the bottom line is that I really understood at the time, 9 years ago, the first three. This fourth paradigm shift, which is the fourth and final, I never really fully understood at the time. Now, as I've reread it, understood it, we need to do this fourth and final paradigm shift. And this will be a topic for future Facebook Lives, as well as some of the things that I'm doing in my own sphere of KeithRN. But it's very simple. We need to emphasize professional identity formation, not just socialization to the role of the nurse. And this could not be more timely. We've got educators like Dr. Nelda Godfrey, who is doing some incredible work with Sigma Theta Tau, and Dr. Cynthia Clark, one of my heroes, who has been advocating for civility in nursing education for the last 15, 20 years of her body of work. But in essence, we need to emphasize the professional formation of a professional nurse with our students. And this is where the pandemic is really, where it's really impacting how well we can accomplish this. Because one of the struggles that we're having endemically in nursing education, do our students understand what it means to act like a nurse? You know, we've been focusing, and I can kind of, many of us have been saying, think like a nurse, clinical judgment. It's all about the thinking and the reasoning. Now, I'm all about that. But if they don't act like a nurse, if they don't care like a nurse, do we really have a nurse? Do we really have a professional nurse would be a better question. And, we need to look at how are you? And that's a question for another Facebook Live, but I want you to reflect on this. How are you doing with professional identity formation in your students? And really what that means real simply is this. How is the ethical development of your students? Do they know what it means to the ethical behavior and the character of the nurse that needs to be lived out? Florence Nightingale had several character traits that she expected of her probationer nurses. One of them was honesty and integrity. And you know what? Plagiarism, cheating gets right to the root of the character. And you know what? If our students, I don't want to be too critical, but if we have endemic cheating, we have rotten fruit. And the root, needs to be transformed. We need to we got to cut off some of these things at the root, because these behaviors are so counter to what a professional nurse represents, but they're also common. They're almost part of the culture of nursing education with students. They just take it for granted that I'm going to take corners, and not all students do. But I'm just blown away as I look at some of the posts of nurse educators in the Facebook group, Teachers Transforming Nursing Ed, of just how common and the struggles, and the lockdown browsers aren't working, and students are still finding end arounds to cheating and plagiarism. I just am so saddened by that. And it's like that professional identity is so essential to what we need to really look at in our program. How are we doing with that professional development, and that recognizing that being a nurse isn't just something you do, it's who you are. How are we doing with our professional identity formation in our students? This is something that we lost with the diploma programs. I'm all for academia and having our profession evolve, but we lost the formation aspect, or at least some of the strengths of diploma, was they were enculturated. They were immersed in the culture of professional nursing. Now that we're doing so much virtual work, and not even in the clinical setting as much as we'd like, we just need to acknowledge this is a very important paradigm shift that needs to be kind of brought back to the forefront. And, we'll be talking about this in the future on Facebook Lives, and how we can encourage this and really do this. And so I just want to kind of throw those four out there and get your thoughts on that. But what I want to look at, and this is I kind of want to make this the focus, is kind of the next half of this presentation of Facebook Live, which is really a dialogue. I want to get your feedback. Think about this question. What is your greatest fear that keeps you from implementing needed change? want you to think about that, because every educator, we have all the knowledge we have in the world right now. We have everything that we could know. We live in an information society, and the internet in nursing knowledge is doubling every 7 years, according to some prominent educators. So when we look at the work of Benner, we look at the things that others and myself have been advocating to change. Many of us are doing that, but there are fears that every one of us have that can kind of keep us stuck. And, for myself, I kind of stepped out of my box 9 years ago. After I read Benner's book, I realized that I couldn't just do it wasn't business as usual. And I had to implement some things differently. But I also recognized that, in essence, I even recently with KeithRN and some of the things that I've been doing for years, I realized I need to do things differently. And you know what? I've been very comfortable with some of the things I've been doing with my model and how I reach out to educators. But you know what? I found it hard to make those change, and I'm really afraid of change. I like things. Once I get in a rut, in a groove, I like to stay in that groove. Once you've been doing it a certain way, but also recognizing that when I have a trusted colleague in my life. Her name is Marianne. And she was really patient and encouraged me to look at the bigger picture and to see things that I'm doing that could be done better, could be done differently. But I struggled to implement for months and months and months things that I needed to do differently to change. And so I'm just looking at some of the pieces here, some of the feedback that your fears are. And, Tonya says failure. That is, we're all can identify with that. How many of you have a fear of failure? You're looking like a fool. You do that active learning. You take a KeithRN case study. You take a case study of your own, and this is going to be awesome. And you know what? It's best practice. And you know what happens? Your students resist. Your students don't like the extra work. It becomes a source of contention and that fear of failure. And it's like, well, my students are not liking this. My students are actually resisting. Do I stay the course? What do I do? And it's like, I just want to encourage you that, stepping out of the boat, Peter walked on water until he took his eyes off the prize. And, in a similar way, we got to recognize that best practice is our guide. Best practice is kind of our true north, and that fear of failure is very real. But the bottom line is that, when you're implementing best practice, you will be successful. And it is a success, even if our students may not appreciate it the first time. So let's, and Kathleen has another comment or another fear, the pushback from students. And again, it's kind of like we fear our students. We fear kind of the consequences of not only just their response, that they may not like it, but we also fear their evaluation. And this is where we need to kind of, I think, recognize that implementing educational best practice and doing it the best that we can. You know what? I made mistakes when I developed my case studies that were in their very draft. They were not that good. They were the best I could do at the time. I've gotten better over the years. But you know what? I did the best that I could. And I knew it was best practice. And so that's why I want to lay the foundation for you in this Facebook Live. Recognizing what is educational best practice, adopting those paradigms in your active learning, and then step out of the boat. Do it. Do the best that you can. And you know what? You're not going to get all students patting you on the back, thanking you for the extra effort that you took in developing this awesome case study or this awesome activity. But if you know in your heart it was the right thing to do, you know what? You can basically look yourself in the mirror and say, regardless of the feedback, I did something different and it made a difference and it will make a difference. And I can tell you from my journey, I had many students resist active learning. From the very first case study that I presented in my spring semester with Med-Surg, I did it every time I taught. Classroom 2, a short case study. Third, fourth. Did it for 7 lectures over the semester. By the 3rd lecture, the students began to see the value. By the 4th lecture, I had most of the class on board. By the 7th lecture, at the end of the semester, I did a survey. It was anonymous, but not one student said to go back to lecture only. They valued the active learning case studies and saw the relevance. You see, your adult learners, your students are adult learners. In a principal paradigm shift of Knowles' active learning theory, they're looking for relevance, not a hoop to jump through. My students saw the relevance of the active learning. Your students will too, but you need to stay the course. And so again, that pushback, that student feedback, the fear of failure, you know what? I just want to give you the foundation to build your active learning on so you can step out of the boat with confidence and recognizing that you're on the right track. And that's why Dr. Benner's work is so influential and so impacting to me that it can help you do that. And so let me just kind of see what else I've got here. The pushback, failure to teach what I should, not covering enough. You know, Tonya, that's a really great insight. That's a topic for another Facebook Live. I've done this on the past about what are those essential aspects of a practice-based lecture. And so, but again, first-year generalist, we're not teaching everything. And look at the most common problems in your content. You know, we can have 101 problems of neuro, med-surg, cardiac, respiratory. What's the top 3? You know, we can begin to just use some very simple principles to help, narrow the funnel in what we teach. And so again, that, Tonya, with time, we can kind of mitigate that problem in time. Not doing it well. You know, Susan, that's I think that, you know what, every educator who's watching this live stream, you want to be the best. You want to do it well. You want to do it right. And you know what? As long as, Susan, you're putting forth your best effort, you're doing the best you can with what you got, and we all have different gifts and abilities, but we're doing the best we can. You know what? There's nothing more that you can do. And it's my passion to just provide educators with the tools, the strategies, the principles to, again, step out of that boat. You know, and Tanya has she's really active on the chat tonight. Out of my comfort zone, and will it work? Now, let me say this, getting out of your comfort zone, that's uncomfortable. And you know what? I'm out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways with KeithRN, even right now. You know what? KeithRN used to be a fun little kind of side thing I used to do. It was really small, and I just kind of was in my own little silo. I had my work, I had others, and I just had KeithRN was just a fun little thing. You know what's happened over the years? It's gotten bigger and bigger and more impacting, and it's kind of become bigger than what I really wanted it to be. I didn't look to build a business with KeithRN. It really isn't. That's not my passion. But it's gotten larger, and with that becomes greater responsibility. And it's like, you know, I'm out of my comfort zone right now, Tanya, but I can tell you this is where my faith informs me. And, you know, as a Christian, you know, I recognize that my help doesn't just come from Keith. I need divine intervention. And I think many of us as educators, we're being stretched in ways that, you know what, you can't do it alone. You know, we'll be talking about how we can overcome our fear of failure and some of these principles, but you know what? I'm just thankful for my faith and for the strength that it gives me. And I hope that you all have a faith that informs you, that can help you be that strength, to be that encouragement that you're not alone when you step out of the boat, to really strengthen and help your students become the few, the proud, the professional nurse. You know, we need strength to do that. And sometimes it's got to come from outside of ourselves. You know, Bridget, you share time and resources. And, you know, that's really the passion that drove KeithRN 9 years ago. You know, I recognize that as a new educator, it took hours and hours to create the tools and the case studies. And you know what? I just recognized that I wanted to slow down, and begin to focus on the needs of educators. So the KeithRN case studies, the handouts, the tools, the website, the blog, the YouTube channel, I've got a lot of information that you can access at no charge. That I just want you to take advantage of on my website and my social media channels, Bridget. So know that you've got a partner here. It's really my passion to be a partner with every educator who wants to be part of the needed change, and to really, know that you're not alone, and these resources can save you a lot of time. And Jacqueline says, I'm not fearful of change. I want or need tools to help with implementing change. And so, Jacqueline, I would just say, again, if you're not familiar with my website, go to KeithRN.com and just see what's there. I've got blogs, free handouts, a free case study on COVID-19. So again, take advantage of those resources that are there for you. I've also got Jacqueline saying, this is another educator, that it may not work, that change is scary. And what I want you to recognize is this: educational best practice needs to inform the change that we make. And so if we're implementing change that is in alignment with educational best practices, and again, this is the foundation from what I see with educational best practices across nursing education, as we implement these paradigm shifts, we can begin with, that's the foundation we build on. KeithRN, really, I took Benner's paradigm shifts and made them practical, made them actionable, created tools like case studies to bring it all together for educators. That's the inspiration of the resources I've developed over the years, as well as using my lens of current practice in the nursing profession to put it all together. And so I just want you to know that that's really the inspiration. And so you can have that reality and that confidence looking at that. And again, fear of failure, Jessica says, fear of failure as in a fear of the change not being interpreted the way it was intended to. And yes, we can sometimes be misunderstood by our students. But you know what? We're not there to burden them, but to empower them, to make them recognize what nursing really is. And that's why we need to bring this context to real world practice and what that looks like. Susan says, feeling overwhelmed that it has to be done all at once. Your mentoring has shown me this is not the case. Changing, teaching a little at a time. And I would just say this, there's a lot of work, and every program is different. But I love the proverb of the Chinese proverb, ancient, says this: a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the single first step. And we can look at the journey and we can see that there's a lot of work to be done, or maybe a little bit of work, maybe just whatever that looks like in your program. But take one step, take one lecture, make it active, cut down the content, use some of the strategies I've shared on my YouTube channel that you can just easily locate, and find those principles to take a first step, whether it be changing a classroom lecture, making it more active, taking a case study, or write your own case study and then present it. To do all of that. So I just want you to know. The other thing I'll just close you with, Debbie says, getting faculty on board to change. And Debbie, this is why a book like this needs to be a part of your library, as well as sharing this at a staff meeting, that these principles of educational best practice are not optional. It's kind of like best practice in the clinical setting. Do we kind of say, well, you know what? I kind of like wiping my hubs with alcohol. I've been doing it for 20 years. Until a few years ago, it came out that chlorhexidine was actually a better, more effective prep and can prevent line infection. Do we still say, well, even though the evidence says this, I'm still going to use alcohol because that's what I'm used to? In the same way, educational best practice must inform how we teach, and it's not optional. Active learning, case-based learning are foundational principles that can transform how we teach to strengthen our students and their learning. And again, that is a sticking point that we have in nursing education. But again, I believe that can change, that every one of you watching this live stream are part of the needed change. It's my passion, and I really love doing this, is just to empower and encourage every one of you to kind of look at your content, your classroom, your clinical differently. recognizing that you can do things differently if that change needs to be implemented. And I want to be a partner and encourage with you in that journey. And so we've done a great job talking about fears, and the fears that you're sharing are not unique. And I want to close with, how do we overcome the fears? So what I want to transition here is basically think about, what have you done as an educator to basically overcome your fears? Because I've got some principles I'm going to share in closing. In just a few minutes, we'll be done. But these are some 4 principles that I really want to encourage you that can help you overcome your fear. Number 1, you cannot implement needed change alone. You need a supportive community of educators. Just as I have had a trusted colleague in Marianne who has helped me overcome my fears and my fear of change, you need a trusted colleague or 2 or more that you can basically collaborate and encourage and strengthen. When our student feedback is this, you can go straight to that person and you can, in essence, work through that and have someone to talk to. Ecclesiastes, Solomon, the wisest man of ancient history, wrote the book of Proverbs, said this: 2 people are better than 1, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. And how true that is. Nursing education is a hard path. There's incivility, there's bullying, there's between students to faculty, faculty to faculty. It's a dark place sometimes. And if you're in a silo like that, I just want you to know that I'm available, or other colleagues that you can trust on. But it's like, I have an email address, KeithRN.com. Contact me if there's anything that I can do to best serve your needs and to be a support for you. Second principle, expect resistance. Sometimes our expectations, like parenting, can be too high, and we are always discouraged because our kids just are not up to that standard of what we want them to be. I was, unfortunately, that parent sometimes. As an educator, expect resistance. It's not rainbows and butterflies in academia. And expect that resistance, but also know that if you're implementing best practice, you're on the right path. And don't let that discouragement detour you from staying the course. And I've already shared point number 3, but again, a faith in something bigger than yourself. You look at David and Goliath, the need to transform nursing education. It's bigger than you are. Your students you can't control. But if you have a faith that informs you, you have a strength to stay the course. And finally, educational best practices need to guide how and what you do. In essence, remember this, that the things that Dr. Benner advocated that I've shared in this live stream, that's your true north. As long as everything that you do in nursing education aligns with bringing context to the bedside of your content, bringing clinical and class together, emphasizing clinical reasoning and those thinking in action skills, using Tanner's clinical judgment model as the foundation of the reasoning. Even nursing process is a reasoning model. Use them to strengthen and transform nursing education. And so I just want you to know that I want you to reflect on, what have you found effective to overcome your fears in nursing education? Because I want to kind of we need encouragement, and I'm sharing my encouragement, but you all have some incredible stories and some insights that I want to share and give you that opportunity, because you're live and not watching this as a recording. But I also want you to know that, on KeithRN, I've got numerous resources, and I just want you to know that, that can help empower you as an educator. If you go to my KeithRN.com, I've got a free COVID-19 case study, Skinny Reasoning, that brings a context with a scenario of COVID. It's a great oxygenation exemplar that you can use and download immediately and use it in your classroom to just kind of give it a road test. See what you think. It kind of refined my framework, but it integrates Tanner's reasoning framework of clinical judgment to develop and practice the most important skill your students must possess, which is clinical judgment. I've also got about 20 plus topics of other case-based studies on KeithRN, but my best value for nurse educators is the all-inclusive membership. That is thinklikeanurse.co, and that has over 110 case studies across the curriculum, webinars that I presented across the country, and full-day workshops. You have an online conference at no additional cost that has contact hours and builds on this content that I've shared about transforming the educator and overcoming your fears and other salient topics on both the classroom and clinical transformation, as well as other handouts to develop clinical judgment. And I also offer office hours for members every Friday from 10 a.m. to 12 noon Central. You can jump in my office video, live stream, and we'll have a conversation and help any challenge that you face one-on-one. And so I just want you to know that you've got those resources available to you. And so in upcoming Facebook Lives, we're going to be discussing how to practically implement these transformational paradigm shifts, including professional identity formation and that professionalism of the nurse, and kind of focusing on making a case for a case-based curriculum. You know, medical education has been using case studies in many creative ways for decades. And as nurse educators, we can learn from the medical model of education and make case studies and case-based curriculum, case-based learning a greater part of our program, in addition to what we're doing to really bring that context to our practice. And so in closing, let me just see if we have some additional comments or questions here. And so Tanya just says this, and I think we'll probably end with this thought, like Nike, just do it. I love that, Tanya. I think that's a great way to close out our Facebook Live today. You know, I've given you kind of the best practices, the best principles, and you know what? Just do it. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to catch this Facebook Live. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and looking forward to continuing this discussion and dialogue. And thank you again for all that you're doing to be part of the needed change. And I will say, and Tanya, you know what? I'll answer that question that you have here about advanced advice to help with this and be down to 3 faculty. That's kind of a personal question. You know what, Tanya? Just email me at my website, which is just, if you want to contact me, and this is true for any of you, you know, it's my passion to serve your needs and be available. I answer my emails within the same day, 99% of the time. So again, if you have a question, a challenge that you just would like to have a dialogue, whether it be by email, be a great place to start. Just email me at keith@keithrn.com. Thank you so much, and you have a great night. Take care.